Being unprepared is how great fathers become weekend visitors. I'm Jude Sandval, and this is Strategic Defense, the operational briefing for fathers who refuse to be sidelined by a system that exploits drift and unpreparedness. I ensure your mistakes don't become your permanent reality. While a lawyer handles your legal rights, I serve as your guide through the decision gap to protect your actual role as a father. You are now entering the command center. Today's briefing begins now. Hello, dads, and welcome to this week's show and briefing. And we're going to start out with a brief visualization. I want you to picture a boat in open water during a storm, waves coming from every direction, wind ripping the sail, no land in sight, and the only thing keeping that boat from being pulled out into the deep open ocean and lost forever is one thing. And that one thing is the anchor. It's not the size of the boat, not how strong the captain is, not how good the crew is at rowing. It is only the anchor. And that's what we're going to be talking about today, because if you've been listening to this show for any amount of time, you know we spend a lot of time talking about action. Setting boundaries, standing your ground, being strong for your kids, showing up, being competent, being capable. And, that's all very important. And I stand by all of that. But here's something I don't think we've talked about enough on this show. And it's something I hear underneath the surface of almost every conversation I have with dads in this community, even the ones who are doing everything right on paper. There's a difference between being strong and being anchored. You can be doing all the things right, showing up, holding boundaries, fighting for your kids, and still feel like you've been tossed around by a storm you have no control over, because so much of what happens next in your life during divorce is completely outside of your hands. The court date you can't control, the judge you didn't choose, whether your ex decides to keep fighting or settle, where you'll be living in 6 months, what your relationship with your kids will look like in a year. None of that is fully in your control during this time. And no matter how hard you work, or how good your attorney is, or how many boundaries you may set, like we talked about last week. So today we're talking about the thing that holds you steady when everything else is genuinely uncertain. And we're talking about having a spiritual anchor. And I want to be really clear from the outset about this episode. This isn't a lecture about religion. I'm not proselytizing to you. It's not me telling you what you need to believe. This is about something much more fundamental than that. It's about having something to hold on to, something bigger than your circumstances when your circumstances feel like they're spinning out of control and are completely out of your hands. So we're gonna do something a little different than our usual tactical boundary setting, court strategy conversations. We're gonna go inward, because I truly believe, after talking to so many of you and my own experience, that the guys who make it through high conflict divorce without losing themselves in the process are rarely the guys with the best attorneys or the most airtight custody strategy. Although those things do matter, which is why we spend a lot of time talking about them. They are the guys, however, who have something to hold on to that has nothing to do with the outcome of the case at all. So this episode is about building or rediscovering or strengthening your spiritual anchor. We're gonna talk about why uncertainty is so uniquely destabilizing for high-functioning men specifically. And then we're also going to talk about the difference between strength and the difference between control. Totally different, because I think a lot of guys in general, dads, have been quietly conflating the two, and maybe the general population. But and what happens is what is the result of that is it's costing you peace that you don't have to be losing. And then finally, we're going to talk practically about what it actually looks like to build or lean into a spiritual anchor, whatever that means for you, and in the middle of a season where almost nothing feels certain. So this divorced advocate community is made up of men from a lot of different backgrounds. Some of you grew up in a specific faith tradition, and maybe you've drifted from it, or maybe you're leaning back into it hard now. And some of you have never really identified with organized religion at all, but have some sense of a higher power or a deeper order of things. And some of you are wrestling with faith questions for the very first time in your life, precisely because this divorce has cracked something open in you that used to feel settled. So wherever you're at, this episode is for you. And I'm not here to tell you which mountain to climb. I'm here to tell you that you need a mountain, something solid underneath your feet. And I want to help you find yours. So let's start with something I think explains a lot about why this particular season is so brutal for so many of you, specifically the men in this community who tend to be capable, driven, high-functioning guys. Here's the pattern that I see over and over again. Men who are used to being competent, used to solving problems, used to being the guy who figures it out, build an entire sense of self-worth and stability around their ability to control outcomes. You're being rewarded your whole life in your career, in your finances, in 100 other areas for working hard and producing results. Efforts in, results out. That's the equation that's worked for you probably for decades. And then divorce happens, and especially high conflict divorce. And suddenly that equation completely breaks down. And you can try to do everything right, show up to every hearing, follow every court order to the letter, be patient, be reasonable, hire the best attorney you can afford, and still not control the outcome. A judge can rule in a way you didn't expect. Happens all of the time. And your ex can make a decision that completely blindsides you. The timeline can stretch out for another 6 months for reasons that you have nothing to do with and that you didn't want. And for a man who has built his entire sense of stability on the premise that effort produces control, that is a profoundly disorienting experience. And it's not just stressful. It is really identity shaking, because the mechanism that you've relied, I should say we, right? Because this was me too, that you've relied on your whole life to keep the ground steady beneath you has stopped working in the worst possible time, right at the exact moment you need steady ground the most. So let me name something here, though, also that I think is really important. And it's something a lot of the dads in this exact situation don't say out loud, even to themselves. A lot of the anxiety, the sleeplessness, the low-grade dread that so many of you described feeling during this season isn't really about any one specific outcome. And it's not really about whether you get every other weekend or every other week. It's about the terrifying experience of not being in control of your life for possibly the first time in your adult life, and not having a framework for how to be okay with that. And let me just say that again, because it's really, really important. And you need to think about this, because this is where the anxiety comes from. This is where the sleeplessness, this is where the dread comes. And it's because it's not really about whether you get what you're looking for through this process every other weekend, parenting time, financial, etc. It is about the experience of not being in control of your own life for possibly the first time in your adult life, and not having a framework for how to be okay with that and how to deal with it. And so sit with this for a minute, dads. You cannot think, work, or muscle your way back into full control during this divorce process. It's not available to you right now. And if I'm going to be frank, we're being, and it was actually never fully available to any of us. It's just that divorce makes the reality impossible to ignore anymore. So that's the cold hard truth about it. And so then the question isn't, how do I get back to being in control, which is what a lot of guys show up in wanting and needing. The question is more, what do I hold on to when I'm not in control? Because you're not going to be in control for a ton of this process. And that's a completely different question. And it requires a completely different kind of strength than the strength you've been relying on your whole life, and probably different kind of strength that you see on social media and all kinds of other divorce podcasts and men's groups and everything else, because it's completely different. It comes from a different, completely different source. And so I want to talk about, and so then what I want to do now is talk about this difference, right? This difference between strength and control. And because I think it's I feel like it's the single most important reframe in the divorce process for the dads. And when they get this in coaching, it helps immensely. A lot of you have an internal definition of strength, like I just referenced from whatever, social media, society, maybe how you grow up. That sounds something like this. Strength means handling everything myself, staying in control, never needing to lean on anything outside of my own capability. And I understand exactly where this definition comes from. For a lot of us dads, especially who grew up with messages about what it means to be a man, needing something outside yourself, whether that's other people or something bigger than yourself, can feel uncomfortably close to weakness. But I want to offer you a different definition of this, and it's actually a more accurate, and it's actually a more accurate one. It is. I'm not saying actually. It is a more accurate one, and certainly a more sustainable one for what we're going through now in divorce. Real strength isn't the absence of needing an anchor. Real strength is choosing to have one on purpose. Real strength is choosing to have an anchor on purpose, deliberately, instead of just white knuckling your way through the chaos completely alone and then defining it or calling it toughness, right? Or manliness or whatever you're calling it. Think about it this way. A tree that survives a hurricane isn't the tree with no roots. It's the tree with the deepest roots. The roots don't make the tree weak. They make it possible for the tree to bend in the wind without snapping, without being uprooted and carried away entirely. That's exactly the function a spiritual anchor serves for you right now. It's not a crutch. And it's not an admission that you can't handle things. It's the root system that lets you bend under pressure that would otherwise break you and still be standing, still be yourself when the storm passes, when this whole divorce process gets over with. And I've talked to a lot of dads in the community who describe it this way, and it's almost identical language, even though they come and from multiple dads, and even though they come from completely different backgrounds and faith traditions or no faith tradition at all in the traditional sense. They describe a shift from white knuckling, gritting their teeth, trying to control every variable and every outcome, trying to will their way through every hearing and every conflict with sheer force of effort, to something that feels more like surrender, but a strong kind of surrender, not a passive surrender. A surrender that says, I'm going to do everything within my control, and I'm going to trust something bigger than myself with everything else that is not within my control. That second posture, the strong surrender, is what I mean when I talk about a spiritual anchor. It's not about giving up. It's about correctly identifying what's actually yours to carry and then setting down the rest instead of trying to carry all of it on your back, which, by the way, was never something any human was built to do. All right, let's get specific because about what actually provides you practically, because I don't want this to stay abstract. And so far it's been abstract. And stick with me, because we're gonna go through a whole process with this and being specific, and then what you can do. And I want you to understand exactly what having this kind of anchor does for you in the day-to-day reality of a high conflict divorce. It gives you a place to put your fear that isn't your kids and isn't yourself. And I'll say that again, because this is the key of what this anchor does for you in the day-to-day reality of this high conflict situation. It gives you a place to put your fear that isn't your kids and isn't yourself and internally. And this is what I see constantly. And I want you to take a moment to reflect and be honest with yourself about whether this describes you or not. Because I'm also describing myself when I was going through the divorce process too, which is why I feel it's so important that we need to talk about this, and you need to think about the spiritual anchors. When men don't have anywhere else to put their fear and uncertainty, it leaks out somewhere. Sometimes it leaks out onto the kids in the form of being short-tempered, distracted, or checked out during your time with them because your mind is somewhere else entirely. Sometimes it leaks out into your own body in the form of sleeplessness, tension, health problems, lots of health problems that men go through during the divorce experience. But then they fail to connect back to the underlying cause, which is the divorce. So a spiritual anchor gives that fear somewhere else to go. When you have a genuine practice of turning your fear and uncertainty over to something bigger than yourself, whether that's through prayer, through meditation, through whatever your specific practice looks like, you're literally, practically giving your nervous system permission to put something down instead of carrying it every single hour of every single day. That's not abstract spiritual language, dads. That's a real tangible relief valve.
Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Hey, dads, Jude here. I'm pausing this conversation for a mission critical warning. Everything we discuss on this podcast only works if you have a role to return to. Most fathers don't lose their kids in court. They lose ground quietly through drift and decisions made under pressure. Being unprepared is how great fathers become weekend visitors. I ensure your mistakes don't become your permanent reality. Stop the drift today at thedivorcedadvocate.com. Take the free weekend visitor risk assessment or book your fatherhood protection session. Your kids are counting on you. Now, back to the show. Men who have consistently described sleeping better because of this, and being more present with their kids because of this, and having more patience in the exact moments where patience matters most. Like when your ex sends that hostile text message or your attorney delivers some bad news. It literally gives you a source of identity that the divorce cannot touch. I'll say it again. It gives you a source of identity that the divorce cannot touch. This matters enormously because if you're like me, your entire sense of who you are is built on being a husband, being seen a certain way by your ex, or even being seen a certain way by the court. All of that is currently under threat, and some of it may not survive the process at all. But if your deepest sense of who you are is rooted in something outside of your marriage, outside of this case, outside of any single relationship, that part of you is untouchable by any ruling, any accusation, any outcome. And that is not a small thing, dads. For a lot of the dads I talk to, this is genuinely the difference between feeling like they're losing themselves through this process and feeling like they're actually discovering or rediscovering who they really are underneath everything that's being stripped away. It gives you the capacity to hold your boundaries, which we talked about last week, from a place of calm instead of a place of fear. This connects directly back to work we've done in previous episodes. Remember, boundaries held out of fear or reactivity tend to collapse the first time they're tested, or they tip over into anger and become weapons instead of boundaries. But boundaries held from a place of genuine internal steadiness, the kind that a real anchor provides, tend to be far more durable and far more calm in their delivery, which, as we've talked about before, is exactly what makes them effective. It gives your kids something to witness that has nothing to do with winning the case. I think it's one, and I think it's the one that will resonate most given everything we've built together on this show. Your kids are watching you right now during what might be the hardest season of their lives too. Even though they experience it differently than you do, what they need to see more than a father who wins every legal battle is a father who has an internal center of gravity, who isn't defined entirely by whatever chaos is happening around him. It's a father who can say in words or simply in how he carries himself, I don't know exactly how this is all going to turn out, and I'm still okay because my sense of who I am and what matters isn't dependent on that outcome. And that's a tough one, but it's one of the most valuable, most durable gifts you can give a child living through family upheaval. And it's not something you can fake, dads. It has to come from somewhere real. So let's get practical. Where is that somewhere real? Because I don't want to leave you with just this nice metaphor about anchors and roots and no actual path forward. Whatever your specific faith background or spiritual orientation, here are some concrete starting points. If you already have a faith tradition you grew up in or have practiced before, even if you've drifted from it, this season is often when dads return to something they set down years ago, sometimes decades ago. If that's you, I want to encourage you not to overthink the return. You don't need to have it all figured out theologically before you walk back through that door, literally or figuratively. Just start small. If that means going back to a service on a weekend you have without your kids, do that. If that means picking back up a practice of prayer, even if it feels rusty or awkward at first, do that. If that means reaching back out to a pastor, a rabbi, a mentor, someone who you knew in that season of your life, do that. The awkwardness of starting again is a very, very small price to pay for what's on the other side of it. Now, if you don't have a specific religious background, or you're not sure organized religion is for you, that's completely fine too. And I don't want anyone listening to think this episode doesn't apply to them because they're not a traditionally religious person. A spiritual anchor doesn't require a specific theology. What it requires is a genuine, consistent practice of connecting to something larger than your immediate circumstances and a willingness to trust that larger thing with the parts of your situation that you can't control. And for some dads,
that looks like a daily meditation practice, just genuinely sitting in stillness and quiet rather than letting your mind spin on the same anxious loops. For other dads, it looks like time in nature, on a trail, hiking, on the water, somewhere that reminds you of your place in something much bigger than just the courtroom. For other dads, it's maybe a men's group, a community of guys who hold each other accountable to something beyond just getting through the day. The specific form, dads, is what I'm getting at. It matters less than the consistency of the practice and your willingness to actually use it, especially on the hard days, not just the easy ones. So build a daily anchor point, not just a crisis mode reaction. Okay, so that's important because here's the mistake I see a lot of dads make. They only reach for their spiritual anchor in the middle of a crisis. The night before a hearing, right after a brutal text from their ex, in the parking lot after a hard conversation with their attorney. And look, reaching for it in a crisis moment is better than not reaching for it at all, for sure. But an anchor that you use only in emergencies isn't nearly as strong as one you've built into your daily rhythm. I want to encourage you to build a small, consistent daily practice, even if it's just 5 or 10 minutes, first thing in the morning or last thing before bed. Whatever that looks like for you, prayer, scripture, or sacred text, if that's part of your tradition, meditation, journaling with a spiritual or reflective lens, quiet time before the house wakes up. The goal, again, is not perfection. The goal is consistency, because an anchor you drop every single day, rain or shine, good news or bad news, becomes something your nervous system starts to trust and rely on, the same way your body learns to trust a routine over time, right? Like in the gym. The other thing, find 1 or 2 people who can hold this with you. And I want to be straight. Faith and trust in something bigger than yourself is powerful, but it's not meant to be a purely solo endeavor. Trying to make it purely solo can start to look a lot like the same self-reliant white knuckling pattern we talked about earlier, just wearing spiritual language instead. So this is a mistake I see happening too. So find a friend, a mentor, a small group, a counselor with a spiritual or faith-informed approach if that resonates with you. Someone who can be honest with about the fact that you're scared, that you don't have it all figured out, that you're leaning on something bigger than yourself because you have to. That kind of honest, witnessed vulnerability is often where the anchor actually takes hold most deeply, more than in private moments alone. And before I wrap up, let me just address one important big thing, because I know some of you listening are wired the way that I am, and your instinct might be to hear all of this and think, okay, so I just trust and let go and stop trying to control the outcome of my case. This is absolutely not what I'm telling you. And I want to be really clear about that, because there's a version of quote unquote faith that becomes an excuse for passivity. And that is absolutely not what we're talking about here. You still show up to every hearing prepared. You still hold your boundaries, the ones we've talked about extensively before. You still hire the best attorney you can, document everything, advocate fiercely for your kids and your parenting time. None of that changes. Trust is something bigger. Trust in something bigger doesn't mean you stop doing your part. It means you stop believing that the entire outcome rests solely and exclusively on your shoulders. And it means you have somewhere to put the parts of the outcome that generally are not within your control, instead of white knuckling every single variable and burning yourself out trying to control things that were never yours to control in the first place. Think of it like this. You row the boat as hard and as skillfully as you know how. That's your job. That's within your control. And you should absolutely be doing it with everything you've got. but you're not responsible for the wind, for the water currents, or for the weather. You can't control that. That's not your job to carry. Your spiritual anchor is what lets you row hard without also trying to control the ocean. And trying to control the ocean, I promise you, is a losing, exhausting, impossible fight that has broken plenty of dads who tried to fight it entirely on their own strength. All right, let's finish up with your homework for the week. As usual, something concrete. Number one, I want you to identify just one specific practice, whatever that looks like for you, that you're going to commit to this week as a daily anchor point, and not a vague intention to, okay, I'm going to be more spiritual. One specific thing, like 10 minutes of prayer each morning, or a walk without your phone, or reading a passage from a sacred text before bed. Pick one and commit to it every single day this week, not just the days that feel easy. Number two, identify one person you can be honest with about where you're actually at spiritually and emotionally in this season. And not a surface level, I'm hanging in there, or I'm fine, right? That's the big one, right? An actual honest conversation about what you're carrying and what you're leaning on to carry it. Reach out to that person this week. And number three, this one's a reflection question, not an action step. I want you to ask yourself honestly, what have I been trying to control this week that was never actually mine to control? I'll say that again. What have I been trying to control this week that was never actually mine to control? Sit with that question. You don't have to solve it. Just notice it for this week, dads. All right, that's what I've got for you this week. It was a little different than our usual tactical conversations, but I think it might be one of the most important episodes we've done together, because none of the strategy, none of the boundary, none of the legal navigation we talk about on the show means much if you don't have something solid underneath your own 2 feet while you're doing it. You can be strong and still need an anchor. In fact, I go so far as to say you can't really be strong, not the sustainable kind of strong, without one. And wherever you find one and wherever you find yours, I hope you drop it deep this week, dads. Thank you so much for listening. If you found value in this today, please share it far and wide on social media. Give us a comment, give us a star rating, and let's get this message and this information out to as many dads as possible. Thank you so much. Have a terrific week, and God bless.
This concludes today's briefing. Remember, in the family court system, intelligence without execution is liability. Ground is lost quietly during the decision gap between your court hearings. Being unprepared is how great fathers become weekend visitors. I ensure your mistakes don't become your permanent reality. Secure your role today at thedivorcedadvocate.com. Take the weekend visitor risk assessment to identify your exposure, or book your private fatherhood protection system. Stay strong. Your kids are counting on you.